Hello, welcome to today's show. I'm Jacqueline Stockwell, CEO and founder at Leadership Through Data. I inspire and motivate information leaders across the world.
I'm here with Jenny Lynn. She is an experienced civil servant with a specialist background in information management. She currently serves as the Digital Workplace Programme Information and Records Manager Lead within the Department of Finance in Belfast. With a demonstrated history of working across data protection, records management, and information access rights, Jenny is now working at the front of the digital transformation for the Northern Ireland Civil Service. She is an active member of the professional community for the Information and Records Management Society, known as the IRMS. Jenny is developing the information architecture for in-place records management in Microsoft 365 for the NICS, making it easier for staff to work collaboratively and do records management without even knowing. And I'm thrilled to have you, Jenny, because we've known each other for quite a long time now. So it's exciting to have you on today's show.
It's one that changes all the time. I mean, this is a fairly new role to me. Jackie only started in December, and I've gone from being a sort of a hands-on information manager, data protection officer, very operational, reacting all the time to queries, questions, issues, very fast pace, to a more kind of proactive and kind of more laid back, not laid back, but certainly more time to sort of think about the way forward. So this program is really to bring in place records management in 365 and retire our old EDRMS. So it's a really exciting place to be. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing, but it's just a different way of working. So yeah, just follow me on the journey as we go. Is all I say, because we're just very, very new to this. Well, the program director had involved me from the very early stage of the program setup to kind of just sort of hear me out on where he thought the program could go just based on my experience. And as we went through the program, it became very obvious that there was a dedicated role there. I was very keen to do that role, but civil service being the way, rightfully so, there's processes to follow, and we followed those processes to do it. So, it was a natural transition for me, but also quite a big change up too. I'm just going from, as I say, that really reactive thing into this proactive way. But the main thing is you don't get a lot with these kind of programs and projects. The right people are in the right job. So experience, understanding, innovation, forward-looking is how I would describe the way we're going with this, and getting the right people in to do that, and recognising those talents is really important for anybody who's looking to involve themselves in these kind of projects.
So tell me about your old role.
This is something that comes up a lot, especially in the Department of Finance, because not only is it, quite outward facing, we do a lot of policy work, and there's outward facing around land and property and statistics and so on. There's also the HR department for the whole of the civil service sits within the Department of Finance. So there's a huge amount of FOI and subject access that goes on in our department. A lot of them overlapping as well. So you would have got requests that took in a wide range of both FOI and SAR. So the main thing we found was to make sure that there were dedicated people for each, that the same people weren't doing the same job, although of course there is a shared common knowledge and a shared experience. Siphoning and siloing what is an FOI and what is SAR is really important, because if you start to mix the two together, it gets very confusing for people. And I think as well, being quite clear about how we educate our staff on each thing, that we don't have a one size fits all, this is information access course. There's specifically awareness around data protection and awareness around freedom of information. So it's important for that. They're linked, but they're not the same. Yeah, it is. I think starting with the staff, it's really important to define that. The other thing as well is, when you're talking about things like where we are mixing personal information in with FOI, that's where you look to your exemptions. You're talking about looking at your Section 40 brackets 2, looking at your Section 40 brackets 1 in some cases when it comes to HR. And, not just telling individuals, we're not going to give you this, it's your personal data, or it's somebody else's personal data, allowing them to understand that actually if they're looking for an element of their own personal data, we'll flip that for you proactively into a subject access request. And I know that's ICO guidance, but sometimes it's quite difficult to do in reality. So it is about ensuring that the customers served right from start to finish, and we're explaining very, very clearly to them the difference between the two things. It's difficult. It doesn't always work, because sometimes people bring their own issues into the situation, but you have to do what you can do to try and make sure it's clear, because there's if those things do get mixed up and they go, say, for example, to the ICO with a concern or complaint, it can get very confusing. So I think my main thing is keep them separate, keep the teams separate, but linked in terms of knowledge.
Amazing. Thank you for that. It's a great piece of advice. So in the civil service, information isn't just data, it's the historical record of government decisions. How has the shift to digital first government changed the way we preserve the why behind policy decisions?
I think it's made it much easier to capture decisions. And because it makes it easier to capture decision making if teams are using the tools properly. Email, all our collaborative spaces we have now, even the version histories we can create, they all create quite a rich record that isn't then confined to an A4 page, so it comes in different looks and feels. But however, the sort of flip side to that is that everything's a bit more dispersed now. Everything's a bit wider spread, so it's about forming that official record, ensuring it's stored in the right place, and making it easy to do the right thing.
How do you implement modern records management in an environment where it's deep set in legacy processes? This is the way we've always done it. Like, what's your suggestions?
Yeah, I think you have to start by meeting people kind of where they are. Legacy processes exist because they solve a problem for people, even if it's inefficiently. So it's first looking at what process they're trying to achieve, what problem they're trying to solve, and then introducing small, manageable changes that will reduce that friction. In the civil service, building alliances or relationships with operational teams is really crucial. So when people see that better workers management saves time, reduces risk, they're much more willing to move away from the familiar old ways of working. And having champions and ongoing managed services too is really important. People who can continue to advocate for, maintain digital workplace when you're no longer embedded in that part of the project. So having those people built into those areas, those people who will champion what you're trying to do, even when you've stepped away from that area, is vital for that ongoing there.
Yeah, and I think that 100%, it's the relationships that you have with the people and feed into those. So
we can't know the business, we can't understand the processes. So if we go in and say, we're going to do this to you, the backs will go up straight away. It's about bringing them on the journey and explaining how it'll help and allowing them to bring their expertise back to you and say, actually, we do this because X, Y, and Z legislation says Y. Right, okay, this isn't necessarily going to work, but something over here will work. It's that two-way engagement for sure.
So you hold a PG diploma from the University of Dundee, which is renowned for its archives and records management program. What is one theoretical principle from your studies that you find yourself applying most in the real world of civil service?
Jackie, we're going back quite a few years now.
I know, but I thought I'd ask.
To be fair, there are things in that theory that I still think about, and use in the day-to-day practice. The main one being that records are evidence. A record is something that is valuable, and it's not just because it exists. So because you've created it doesn't mean it has to be kept as a record, despite what your panic mindset thinks. So it's really about cutting through the noise of we must keep everything just in case, and thinking about, if it's evidentiary and it gives the evidence of a decision, that's when we keep it. That's the record, not all the conversation around that decision. So, and I think the ICO indeed would agree with that as well. They're not interested in you keeping every single minutiae piece of conversation that comes to decision. They're interested in the decision. So keeping that records as evidence sort of theory works in practice for your entire life cycle.
What made you get that practitioner's certificate, and what was the outcome in your job role?
Yeah, I mean, a postgraduate diploma is great if it's for you, because it is academic, it is theoretical, it gives you that theoretical practice behind how you apply it, and the certificate helps you actually apply that in the real world. So it gives you real world case studies, real world examples to work from. So I think that, it shows you how to structure that legislative knowledge into an understandable and meaningful way for people. And you can use it to, learn how to weigh risks and design mitigations that are practical rather than kind of paper theory. And it really helped with understanding, like spotting some patterns quickly, processing, looking at, so understanding data flows is something that, you can only really learn in practical awareness and training. So it's kind of the practical sense to the theoretical background.
I just want to probe around life cycles, the life cycle of a record. So many people think that records management is just don't delete things, delete things. From your experience, what is the most high risk stage of the information life cycle in a government context?
Yeah, I think most stages of the life cycle are risky in a way, but what we are really focusing on in the program and what has become apparent is, creation is really something we need to take a better focus on. I don't think it's about necessarily fully about risk, but certainly about making better decisions right from the outset, which will cause a lot of less pain down the line. So it's maybe that, good foundations build a good house. And I think that, creation is something that we just took for granted. It's created there, it's created here. It's in the civil service, we create right into our EDRMS, which is actually an ERMS, the way we treat it. And it makes everything very structured and very much like a record right from the outset, which isn't necessarily the right thing. And what we're trying to do is flip that narrative on the head to say that not everything you create is a record, and it's going back to that, what's evidence, what's your decision making, and treating things, and it's a term we're starting to use now, as a managed document, and talk about things in MS365, those tools that allow you to manage things in a very structured way with good managed metadata, but not making it a record, not making it immutable until it really needs to be so. So I think it's that creation stage. We're making those early decisions around, or we're storing things in various places, but when it comes to capturing it, that it becomes, it's a managed document and it's managed nicely, but it's still usable for people. And I think that if you have a good start, then when you come to retention disposal, a lot of those issues around, we've got so much stuff that we don't even know where to start with retention disposal, or we're scared, it's been so long, we're scared to let go of it. A lot of those decisions have been made early on. So you've got your disposal policies in place that will get rid of the rot right before, so it doesn't become a problem towards the end. Starting out, the creation is where it all should really begin. Not ironically.
Great, and then you put AI in there, don't you? And then creation becomes even bigger and more.
It's only taking you 5 minutes to mention the AI word, Jackie. That's
right. I try and keep the dirty word out of it, but it is.
It just falls in.
Talking about
You can't avoid
creation. Yeah, no. Okay, so let's talk about SARS. So they're becoming increasingly more complex and far more frequent.
Very.
Public sectors and government organisations are getting more and more. What is your strategy for managing vexatious or massive SARS without sort of paralysing the daily operations of the department?
It's really difficult, Jackie, as you know, because it's always been, our first foundation for around SARS is give the people what they need, what they want. We try as hard as possible not to restrict a subject access request, and it's always been quite very, very, very rare that you would step back and say, look, we can't service this anymore, and not necessarily through volume, but certainly through the measures of manifestly unreasonable, rather than volume, because I don't think that's a really good way. We do, in Department of Finance, before I moved on as a DPO, we receive hundreds and hundreds of subject access requests because there is the HR in there. And I think that, the issues we've had with volumes will change hopefully going forward, because I think the most important thing is to be more proactively transparent with your data around, especially around HR processes. So there's systems being created that allow you more access to your own personal data. And I think as well, a big thing is around trust. So people don't trust processes in HR. They don't trust that people are telling them the truth. They don't trust that it's not transparent enough. So by changing that, that transparency around the actual HR process will hopefully look to reduce the amount of people putting in subject access requests. I think there are still, issues around, with the new Data Use and Access Act, we're moving towards that sort of FOI definition of vexatiousness. But I think that genuinely we still need to be quite cautious about doing that when people are genuinely looking for their own personal information for the purposes. So, I think what would cut the volumes and cut the kind of tension in there is to be more transparent from the outset about people, about HR particularly, or about their processes, and allow them access their data easier themselves. They're not getting caught in this entrenchment between their issues and SAR.
But I want to talk about sort of data protection by design, and you're working with teams, project managers, I assume, to deliver what you need to deliver. So how do you get project managers to think about data protection at the start of this project that you're doing, rather than treating it right at the end? Well, this is why I was so excited that you got this job, Jenny, because it's kind of where you can think about it as well, rather than a checkbox exercise at the end.
See, it's the eternal question, Jackie, isn't it? It's always about, when do we do data protection during a project? And there's a lot of projects in the civil service, a lot of big, outward facing ones, a lot of internal ones, changing systems in IT, for example. And I think it all starts with data protection by design and default. It is from that very, very outset of the program. And I think the main thing I've done is put the DPO out there as put them in your boardroom, put them in your project board, put them in your project team as a consultation. It's talking about that right from the outset, because what we're talking about here is cost saving. That's what you're selling, is cost saving. You design a IT system and you talk to me at the end. I'll point out the things that you have not built in, retention disposal, for example. That's going to cost you down the line. So, I focused on those kind of more project incentives around, I'm going to save you time and money if you talk to me from the outset. And they respond well to anything that talks about reducing risk later on, improving stakeholder confidence, preventing the need for the last minute redesigns, as I say. So it's talking about data protection as a project enabler rather than a blocker is really important. So we're going to enable you for your project to be successful, for your system to be successful, for your outcome to be successful. And I think as well, we have worked very closely, or I had worked very closely with our procurement teams, our finance teams, our IT colleagues as well, to say, if you are approached by somebody who's looking to do a new tender or a new system, mention my name, bring me into the room, and put those DPIA checkpoints into the governance paperwork as you go along with your project managers. And that just becomes part of that part of the process. It just becomes natural that way.
How do you build the culture of compliance where you see staff as enablers rather than barriers?
I think it's about positioning data protection and indeed information management as something that helps people do their jobs. I think we go back to the last question there. It's about improving how you're doing things, improving how your project goes, improving how your piece of work goes, and make their jobs easier and more safe. So my priorities were always simple, practical guidance, quick wins, being really approachable to people and quite collaborative, and explaining why things exist, not just what why, so for example, the legislation, explaining why a rule in legislation exists, not just what that rule is. It's not just computer says no, it's because, why, well, it depends, let's look at this way. This is why we're doing it this way. So I think that, that's really important to have that sort of balanced engagement with and collaborative with people. And whenever they feel supported that way rather than judged, they're far more likely to go along with you on the journey and adopt that good practice. So, it's just about being, I'm not, here, nobody wants to be scared of the person with the big gavel who's going to come down on them. It's collaborative. You have to be personable and bring people along on the journey. And I think a bit of humour also helps too. The first thing, if there was a data incident and somebody came to me and said, I have a staff member who's made an error, they've lost a night's sleep over this, I am straight on the phone. Just don't. Do not ever do that to yourself. It is not worth it. Please do not feel bad. Mistakes happen. I've never encountered a malicious person, thankfully, but mistakes happen. We'll work through this together. I'm not in the culture of blame here. We'll just work to fix the issue. And change our cultures to make it better.
And I think that's so important, because that's your influence, that's your approach, that's how you deal with the people, and that's how you build those relationships. And I think that is a huge part of an information leader's job role, to have those relationships, so they will be included in things without being shut out of them. So I think that's an amazing piece of advice there. Thank you. So last question from me. If you could automate one part of the FOI SARS process tomorrow, what would it be?
Automate it? Maybe dealing with the ICO? Who knows? Do you know what? I'm going to say I wouldn't automate anything that involves the staff, the FOI staff, because the involvement they have in terms of knowing the legislation, knowing the systems, knowing the people is really, really important. I mean, you can throw AI on the data and it'll bring you back an answer. Having that, the same as what I'm doing in terms of information leadership, is that conversation, that collaboration with staff who have to do a lot of work to put information into FOI. Having the team there with that skill and knowledge to support them on that journey, you can't automate that. You just can't, because that is just human interaction between, civil servants and colleagues to bring people on the journey. And as well as that, whenever a conflict does come up, you're able to, you've built those relationships to get you through that without being scathed or people falling out. So it's really, really vital that we don't automate the human interactions to get the results that we need.
Yeah, 100%. So there's still a human behind the job at the end of the day going forward. So it's been absolutely sensational to have you on the show today, Jenny. How can listeners reach out to you if they want to know more about your old job or your new job?
As you know, Jackie, I'm not great on LinkedIn, but I am on there. So please follow me on LinkedIn. And if you DM me, I'll eventually get back to you.
Thank you for listening to the Journals of the Information Entrepreneur with me, Jacqueline Stockwell. I hope you found this episode inspiring and helpful and have some takeaway tips that can be useful to you. If you liked this episode, please like, review and share it with your friends. Your support helps us reach more information leaders to stay inspired and listen to great content. Want to test out your strengths and weaknesses and measure it against our Empower framework? Please complete the scorecard. It's a great way to improve and evaluate your skills. You can find the scorecard at the end of the description of this podcast. Stay tuned for a new podcast every Thursday, and remember to be bold, be brave and be beautiful.